A waitress, her shoes worn thin from countless shifts, discreetly slipped a folded napkin to a man who looked homeless, huddled in the corner of the otherwise opulent five-star restaurant. As he opened it, the words within made his hands tremble. He's poisoning the supply chain. What Lucy, the waitress, didn't know was that this homeless man was actually Daniel Reed, worth a staggering $8 billion and the owner of the very restaurant she worked in. The events that followed would save her dying brother's life, expose a criminal conspiracy that threatened countless others, and prove that even the smallest act of courage could change everything. This is a true story, a real-life account of what happens when the richest man in the room decides to masquerade as the poorest. And believe me, you won't believe how it all unfolds. Welcome to Voice of Granny. If you're enjoying the story, please hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. You know, sometimes the richest people in the world feel the most isolated. And that's exactly how Daniel Reed felt on that bleak, cold evening in London. Daniel possessed a net worth of $8 billion. Yes, you heard correctly, $8 billion. He owned Reed Pharmaceuticals, one of the largest and most influential medicine companies on the globe. From his towering glass office, high above the city's sprawling landscape, he could survey his empire. Yet, the one thing he couldn't see was the truth about the people surrounding him. Every day, people offered him smiles, chuckled at his jokes, and reflexively agreed with his every utterance. But Daniel sensed a hollowness, a lack of authenticity. These weren't genuine expressions of warmth. They were carefully crafted, plastic facades. People saw only his wealth, not the man beneath the surface. After years of this charade, Daniel felt like he was suffocating in loneliness, drowning in a sea of insincerity. So he devised a plan, a series of tests really. Every few months, Daniel would embark on what seemed like a bizarre undertaking to those around him. He would shed his expensive tailored suits and designer watches, trading them for old, worn-out clothes sourced from local charity shops. Faded jackets with telltale signs of wear and tear, scuffed shoes that had clearly seen better days, and jeans that were thin and threadbare. When he glanced at his reflection, he no longer saw a billionaire staring back. Instead, he saw someone ordinary, someone struggling, someone invisible. And that was precisely the point. Tonight, Daniel was venturing into the Royal Crown, the most prestigious restaurant within his vast company holdings. It was the crown jewel of his business empire, a haven for movie stars, influential politicians, and socialites, where a single meal could easily exceed the monthly earnings of the average person. But ironically, Daniel had never actually experienced it firsthand, not really. Oh, he'd scrutinized the reports, the meticulously crafted spreadsheets overflowing with flawless figures. His managers assured him that everything was perfect, 5-star reviews, record profits, delighted customers. But numbers on paper, as he knew all too well, didn't reveal the full picture. They couldn't capture the nuances of human interaction, the subtleties of honest intentions versus calculated deception. They couldn't reveal the true hearts of the people within those walls. And so there he was, dressed as someone who could barely afford a bus ticket, hesitantly pushing open the heavy, ornate golden doors of the Royal Crown. The warmth enveloped him first, followed by an intoxicating blend of aromas, expensive wines, sizzling grilled meats, and the delicate fragrance of fresh flowers. The interior was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the high ceilings like frozen waterfalls, casting a dazzling light upon the scene. The plush carpet was so thick that his feet sank into it with each step. But when the hostess, a statuesque woman with perfectly coiffed hair, laid eyes on him, her practiced smile vanished quicker than snow in summer. She subjected him to a cold, dismissive gaze, her nose wrinkling slightly as if she detected an unpleasant odor. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with thinly veiled disdain. It was clear she believed he didn't belong. "Table for one, please." Daniel responded quietly, deliberately making his voice sound tired and uncertain. The hostess paused, her eyes darting around the dining room, taking in the well-heeled patrons in their $1,000 suits and glittering jewelry. Then, she looked back at Daniel in his threadbare charity shop jacket. "Do you have a reservation?" she inquired, the question laced with skepticism. "No, I don't." "Is that a problem?" Her smile tightened, becoming almost brittle. "We're fully booked, sir, but let me see what I can do." She tapped away at her computer, drawing out the process, making a dramatic show of how challenging this was. Finally, she looked up, her expression conveying a reluctant concession. "I can offer you a table near the kitchen. It's all we have." Daniel understood the implication perfectly. It was the worst table in the entire restaurant, the one reserved for unwanted guests, tucked away and hidden from the view of the more valued patrons. "That's fine," he replied simply. As he followed her through the bustling restaurant, Daniel felt the weight of countless stares. Conversations momentarily ceased, and eyes scrutinized him with blatant judgment. He could almost hear their unspoken thoughts. What's someone like him doing here? It stung, more than he anticipated. Even though he'd expected this reaction, even though he knew it was part of his self-imposed test, a part of him still remembered being young and poor, and he recalled vividly what it felt like to be looked down upon. The table was tiny and unsteady, crammed into a corner near the constantly swinging kitchen doors. Every few seconds, waiters rushed past, laden with trays of food. The doors banged open and shut incessantly, creating a noisy and disruptive atmosphere. Perfect. From his strategic vantage point, Daniel could observe everything. He watched the waiters showering the wealthy tables with obsequious smiles and exaggerated attentiveness, practically bowing to their every whim. He observed the manager, a man with slicked back hair and a suit that was just a touch too tight, engaging in boisterous laughter with important-looking customers. But the moment the manager turned away, his smile vanished, replaced by a stern expression as he barked orders at the young staff, who visibly jumped like frightened rabbits. Daniel sighed inwardly. This was precisely what he had feared. His restaurant was nothing more than a stage, a theater of carefully constructed artifice. Everyone was acting, playing a role. The kindness was manufactured, the respect was transactional, bought and paid for with money. Is this what I've built? He wondered sadly. A place where human beings are treated like objects, their worth determined solely by their financial status? He'd been sitting there for about 10 minutes when a young woman approached his table. And immediately, something about her struck him as different. The other waiters moved with practiced grace and confidence, like dancers gliding across a stage. But this girl seemed fragile, almost weary. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she placed a basket of bread on the table. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, there was no judgment in her eyes, no hint of disgust, only genuine kindness. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of sincerity. "My name is Lucy, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Lucy. The name suited her perfectly. It meant light, and somehow, in this dimly lit corner of the restaurant, that's precisely what she was. Daniel noticed her worn shoes, observed how slender her wrists were, and saw the profound weariness etched onto her young face. Something shifted within his heart. This was no longer just a test. This girl, this Lucy, was real. And in a restaurant filled with fake smiles and calculated acts of kindness, her authenticity shone like a precious diamond. He didn't realize it yet, but this girl was about to change everything. Let me tell you a little more about Lucy Carter because her story is one that will break your heart. Lucy was only 22 years old, but she carried the weight of the world on her slender shoulders. She should have been enjoying her final years of university, attending parties, worrying about exams and boys, and all the normal concerns of a young adult. But life, as it often does, had other plans for her. Her younger brother, Tommy, was just 15 years old, and Tommy was dying. Well, not dying exactly, but he was battling a relentless disease called cystic fibrosis. It's a devastating illness that causes a buildup of thick mucus in the lungs, making it increasingly difficult to breathe. Every day was a struggle, every breath a hard-fought battle. The treatments Tommy desperately needed cost a small fortune, thousands upon thousands of pounds every single month. Their insurance had run out long ago, depleted by years of mounting medical bills. Their mother had tragically passed away 3 years prior, succumbing to a sudden illness. And their father, well, he had disappeared shortly after Tommy was born, unable to cope with the challenges of raising a sick child. It was just Lucy and Tommy against the world. Every single penny Lucy earned went toward keeping her brother alive. Every tip she received, every extra shift she worked, every meal she skipped to save a few pounds. It all went to Tommy's doctors, Tommy's medicines, Tommy's oxygen tanks. She was drowning in debt, drowning in fear, and drowning in utter exhaustion. And then there was Mr. Harrison. Gerald Harrison was the restaurant manager, a cruel and calculating man with a perpetually fake smile and cold, predatory eyes. He had discovered that Lucy had made a minor mistake a few weeks earlier. She'd inadvertently written down the wrong number on an inventory form. A trivial error, easily rectified. But Harrison had seized upon it, weaponizing it against her. He'd summoned her to his office, accusing her of stealing. He threatened to fire her, ensuring she'd never find decent employment in the restaurant industry again. He even threatened to call the police, knowing full well that a criminal record would further jeopardize her already precarious situation. Lucy had begged him, pleaded with tears streaming down her face. "Please, sir, I need this job. My brother, he's sick. If I lose this job, he'll die." Harrison had responded with a slow, deliberate smile, a chilling expression that sent shivers down her spine. "Well," he'd said, his voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet tone. "Maybe we can work something out." He informed her that she owed him £5,000 for the stolen inventory. He would deduct it from her paycheck, bit by bit. He would control her tips, siphoning off a portion for himself. She would essentially be his prisoner, indentured to him until the debt was repaid. But there was more. Harrison had learned that Lucy had studied accounting at university before she was forced to drop out to care for Tommy. He exploited this knowledge, forcing her to stay late after her shifts, compelling her to assist him with secret bookkeeping, manipulating numbers that didn't quite add up, dealing with invoices from shell companies that didn't exist, and funneling money into hidden accounts. Lucy knew instinctively that something was deeply wrong. She suspected Harrison was engaged in some sort of illegal activity, but what could she do? If she spoke up, he would undoubtedly fire her, and if he fired her, Tommy would die. So, every night, she returned to their cramped, run-down apartment, climbed into bed still fully dressed because they couldn't afford to run the heating, and cried silently so that Tommy wouldn't hear her. She was trapped, hopeless, utterly alone. Until tonight, when Lucy first saw the man at table 32. Her heart went out to him immediately. She recognized something in his eyes, a shared understanding of what it felt like to be judged unfairly, to be marginalized and pushed aside. The hostess had treated him like garbage, and the other waiters were pointedly ignoring him, focusing their attention on the tables occupied by wealthy customers who were likely to leave generous tips. But Lucy simply couldn't bring herself to do that. Her mother had instilled in her a profound sense of empathy and a belief in the inherent worth of every individual. Every person deserves dignity, regardless of their financial status. Rich or poor, it doesn't matter. We're all human beings. So, when the man ordered the cheapest beer on the menu, Lucy didn't judge him. She simply smiled and said, "Of course, sir. I'll get that right away." But then something unexpected happened. When she returned to take his food order, the man looked up at her and said calmly, "I'll have the Emperor's ribeye, please." Lucy's heart skipped a beat. The Emperor's ribeye was the most extravagant item on the menu, a massive steak, dry-aged for 90 days and served with truffle sauce and an elaborate potato gratin. It cost £450, almost as much as her monthly rent. She glanced at his worn jacket, his scuffed shoes. It didn't make sense. Was he joking? Was this some kind of elaborate trick? The man continued to watch her intently, his gaze unwavering. "And I'll have a glass of the 1995 Bordeaux to go with it." Lucy felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. That particular wine cost £250 per glass. Together, this meal would cost a staggering £700. According to restaurant policy, she should have immediately alerted Mr. Harrison. Any order exceeding £200 from a walk-in customer required the manager's approval and a pre-authorization of their credit card. But when Lucy looked into this man's eyes, she saw something that resonated deep within her soul, calmness, intelligence, and, perhaps, just perhaps, a subtle hint of a test. She made a snap decision, a decision that could potentially cost her everything. "Excellent choice, sir," she said quietly, maintaining her composure. "I'll put that in right away." As she walked towards the computer terminal to enter the order, her hands trembled so violently that she could barely type. She knew what would happen next. The system would flag the high-value order, and Mr. Harrison would receive an alert on his tablet. Sure enough, within seconds, Harrison was storming towards her, his face flushed with anger. "Carter," he hissed, grabbing her arm with surprising force. "What the hell do you think you're doing? That homeless-looking guy just ordered 700 quid worth of food, and you didn't get a card first? He didn't seem like he was joking, sir, Lucy stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. Are you stupid? Harrison's grip tightened, causing her to wince in pain. When he runs off without paying, that's coming out of your wages. All of it. And with what you already owe me, you'll be working here for free for the next 6 months. Lucy felt a wave of cold fear wash over her. 6 months of working for nothing. How would she ever pay for Tommy's medicines? But then, she glanced past Harrison's contorted face towards table 32. The man was watching them. He couldn't possibly hear what they were saying, but he could clearly see Harrison gripping her arm. He could see her fear, and he offered her the smallest, most subtle nod, as if he understood, as if he truly saw her. In that instant, something profound shifted inside Lucy. She couldn't articulate it, but suddenly, she knew what she had to do. She had to take the biggest risk of her life. Have you ever been so utterly desperate that you'd risk everything on a crazy, improbable hope? That's precisely where Lucy found herself that night. As she served the mysterious man his incredibly expensive meal, an idea began to take shape in her mind. A wild, dangerous, and possibly insane idea. This man was different. She could sense it in the way he observed everything with those quiet, intelligent eyes, in the way he'd ordered that exorbitant meal without any trace of arrogance or showmanship, and in the way he looked at her, really looked at her, as if she were a person and not just a servant. Maybe, just maybe, he could help. Throughout the evening, Lucy found herself constantly glancing at him. He ate slowly and thoughtfully. He asked her questions about the neighborhood, about London in general, and even about her life. Not in a creepy or invasive way, but with genuine interest. No customer had ever done that before. When she brought his coffee at the end of the meal, she noticed something that solidified her decision. He paid in cash. Exact change. £73 including tax. Not a penny more or less. That wasn't normal. Wealthy people used credit cards, and poor people couldn't possibly afford to have the exact change on hand for a meal like this. So, who was he? The restaurant was closing soon. It was now or never. Lucy's hands trembled uncontrollably as she made her way to the staff room. Her heart pounded so fiercely that she thought it might burst through her chest. What she was about to do could get her fired, potentially arrested, and could ultimately destroy everything she had worked so hard to protect. But Tommy's face flashed in her mind, her sweet little brother, struggling to breathe, trusting her to save him. She had no choice. She grabbed a clean, white napkin from the stack, found a pen in her apron pocket, and began to write. Her handwriting was shaky and uneven, but she wrote as legibly as possible. They're watching you. The kitchen isn't safe. Check the files in Harrison's office. He's poisoning the supply chain. Short, direct, and terrifying. She didn't sign her name. That would be suicide. But she hoped, desperately, that this mysterious man would understand, would investigate, would help. She folded the napkin into a tiny square and tucked it deep inside her apron pocket. It felt like it was burning against her leg. When she returned to table 32 to clear the remaining dishes, her throat was so tight that she could barely speak. Will there be anything else, sir? No. Thank you, Lucy, he said softly. Everything was perfect. This was it. The moment of truth. Lucy's training had taught her to be smooth, professional, and invisible. She began clearing the table with practice movements, coffee cup, water glass, dessert plate. As her right hand picked up the small tray, where he'd left his payment, her left hand, hidden from view by her own body, slipped the folded napkin from her pocket and placed it discreetly on the table. But then, her nerve broke. What if Harrison was watching? What if someone saw her? In a surge of panic, she immediately covered the napkin with the payment tray and quickly picked it back up. The whole sequence took less than a second, but it felt like an eternity. She had inadvertently hidden the note again instead of leaving it for him. Wait. The man's voice stopped her cold. Her back was to him. Ice ran through her veins. Oh God, he'd seen her. He'd seen her place something on the table and then immediately take it back. Now, he was likely confused, perhaps angry, or suspicious. Slowly, like a condemned person walking towards their execution, Lucy turned around. The man wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the empty space on the table, where the note had briefly been. Then, his eyes lifted to meet hers. There was no anger there, only confusion and perhaps a hint of disappointment. He'd been curious to see what she had tried to leave him, but she had accidentally taken it back. Lucy's mind raced. She had come this far. Tommy's face, her mother's memory, the horrifying things she had witnessed in Harrison's files. She couldn't give up now. Summoning a courage she didn't know she possessed, Lucy walked back to the table, her legs feeling like jelly. She could see Harrison across the room, starting to look in their direction, his brow furrowed with suspicion. Without uttering a word, she tilted the tray slightly. The tiny white square of napkin slid off and landed silently on the polished wood. She placed the tray down on top of it, deliberately this time, leaving it for him. You forgot something, she whispered, the words barely audible. Then, she turned and walked away, not daring to look back. Her whole body was shaking. She felt like she had just jumped off a cliff. Behind her, Daniel Reed sat very still, his heart pounding in his chest. He had witnessed the entire awkward exchange, the placement of something, the sudden panic, the retrieval, and finally, the desperate second attempt. This brave girl had just tried to give him something secret, something so important that it terrified her. He waited until she had disappeared through the kitchen doors. Then, casually, as if reaching for his jacket, he slipped his hand over the payment tray. His fingers found the folded cloth. It was slightly damp from her nervous grip. He stood up, put on his worn jacket, and gave a small nod to Mr. Harrison, who was watching him suspiciously from across the room. Just a nobody, leaving after an overpriced meal he probably couldn't afford. Daniel walked out into the cold London night. The door closed behind him, shutting out the warmth and golden light of the Royal Crown. He walked 2 blocks before stopping under a street lamp. His hands were steady as he unfolded the napkin. And then, he read the words that would change everything. They're watching you. The kitchen isn't safe. Check the files in Harrison's office. He's poisoning the supply chain. Daniel read it once, twice, 3 times. This wasn't a phone number. This wasn't a plea for money. This was a warning, a stark accusation. Poisoning the supply chain. His company? His restaurants? His responsibility? And this brave, terrified girl with the worn-out shoes had just risked everything to tell him. Looking back at the warm glow emanating from the Royal Crown's windows, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Daniel stood on that cold street corner for a long time, simply staring at those four terrible words, poisoning the supply chain. If this was true, it wasn't just theft. It wasn't just a corrupt manager skimming money. This was something that could inflict real harm on people, make them sick, maybe even kill them. He pulled out his phone, a simple, untraceable device he used exclusively for these undercover expeditions, and called the only person he trusted completely. Robert, it's me. Robert Shaw was Daniel's right-hand man. They had built Reed Pharmaceuticals together from the ground up. Robert was more than just an employee. He was practically family. Daniel, what's wrong? You sound. I need everything you can find on Gerald Harrison. He's the manager at the Royal Crown. Employment history, bank records, social media, everything. And Robert, it needs to be completely off the books. Nobody can know we're investigating him. There was a brief pause. Robert knew better than to ask unnecessary questions. How fast do you need it? Before sunrise. Bloody hell, Daniel. What did you find? Daniel recounted everything. The dismissive hostess, the arrogant manager, the girl named Lucy with fear etched to her eyes, and the cryptic note. When he finished, Robert was silent for a moment. Then, he said softly, if she's telling the truth, this girl is incredibly brave. I know. That's why I need you to find out everything about her, too. Lucy Carter, early 20s, works as a waitress. Robert, I think she's in danger. I'm on it. But Daniel, if there really are files in Harrison's office, we need to get them before he destroys them. A surprise audit tomorrow won't work. He'll have plenty of time to hide everything. I know, Daniel said grimly. That's why I'm going back tonight. You can't be serious. You want to break into your own restaurant? I don't see another option. Robert sighed, a sound Daniel knew well. It meant Robert thought he was being reckless, but would nevertheless do everything in his power to help. Fine, but you're not going alone. I have a contact in London, former MI6. She specializes in getting into places quietly. Her name's Victoria. I'll have her meet you. 40 minutes later, Daniel was sitting in a dark car with a woman who looked like she could kill you with a pencil. Victoria was maybe 40, with short gray hair and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Your friend Robert says you need to retrieve files from an office, she said without preamble. Tell me about the security. Daniel described the Royal Crown's security setup, a top-of-the-line alarm system, numerous security cameras, and Harrison's office, which would undoubtedly have its own separate lock, perhaps even motion sensors. Victoria smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm or reassuring smile. I've broken into MI6 headquarters for training exercises. Your restaurant will be easy. But we can't just break in. Too obvious. She reached into the back seat and pulled out 2 gray uniforms. The restaurant uses Sparkle Clean Services. We're going to be their newest employees. The plan was brilliant. Robert, working his magic from Daniel's office, hacked into the cleaning company's system and added 2 new workers to tonight's shift. He created fake IDs and forged background checks. By 1 a.m., Daniel and Victoria were walking through the service entrance of the Royal Crown, clad in janitor uniforms, pushing cleaning carts, and effectively invisible. The real cleaning crew barely glanced at them. They were tired, eager to finish their shift and go home. Daniel and Victoria moved with purpose, as if they belonged there. Offices down that hall, Daniel whispered. 3rd door on the left. Victoria nodded. You stay here. Be my lookout. If you see anyone coming, tap your earpiece once. Don't speak, just tap. She'd given him a tiny communication device earlier. Now, Daniel stood in the hallway, pretending to mop the floor while Victoria approached Harrison's office. What happened next was like watching a master magician at work. Victoria produced a small device and held it up to the security camera. The red light blinked, and then went dark. She had looped the video feed, so it would appear as if the camera was still functioning normally. Then, she knelt by the door, carefully examining the electronic lock. It's a 6-digit code, she whispered into her earpiece. Any ideas? Daniel thought about what he had observed about Harrison's personality. He was arrogant, self-important, and likely believed himself to be invincible. Try 111,111. Men like him often think they're untouchable. Asterisk click. Asterisk the door opened. Amateurs, Victoria Mater. Daniel watched the empty hallway, his heart pounding in his chest, while Victoria searched the office. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. There's a safe, she whispered. Behind the bookshelf. I need the combination. Daniel's mind raced. What kind of code would Harrison use? Something personal, something he would remember easily, but that others wouldn't guess. Look around the room, Daniel said. Photos, trophies, anything with dates or numbers. There's a football trophy, she replied, engraved with 2019. And a photo of him, wearing a jersey with the number 9. Try 092019. A tense pause. Then, I'm in. Inside the safe, they found stacks of cash, a passport, and a black leather notebook. Victoria photographed every page of the notebook with a specialized camera. She also discovered that Harrison's computer was password protected. However, Victoria simply plugged in a small device that began copying the entire hard drive. Got it. She finally breathed, the word barely audible. Emerging from the confines of the office, she carefully pulled the door shut, ensuring it clipped softly behind her. With practiced ease, she reset the security camera, erasing any trace of their presence. To any casual observer, nothing was amiss. Just 2 ordinary cleaners going about their mundane routine. They exited the restaurant as discreetly as they had entered, shadows blending into the background. Back in Victoria's car, Daniel's phone vibrated urgently. A terse message flashed across the screen. Files received. Robert. Then, a moment later, another message, this one laced with chilling urgency. Oh God, Daniel. This is worse than we thought. While Daniel and Victoria had been inside Harrison's office, Robert's team, a collective of digital sleuths and forensic accountants, had been meticulously dissecting the stolen data. Their findings were not just disturbing, they were downright horrifying. Harrison, it turned out, had been sourcing his meat from a supplier called Westland Processing. On the surface, it appeared to be a legitimate operation, a respectable name in the food industry. But a deeper investigation revealed a grim truth. Westland had been shuttered 6 months prior by the health department, condemned as a breeding ground for bacterial contamination, overrun with rats, riddled with mold, and teeming with salmonella. Harrison, fully aware of this appalling reality, was purchasing this toxic, contaminated meat for pennies on the dollar, then brazenly serving it to unsuspecting customers at premium prices. The difference in cost, a staggering sum amounting to hundreds of thousands of pounds, was being siphoned off to an organized crime syndicate, a shadowy network operating in the dark underbelly of the city. The note Lucy had left wasn't merely a metaphor, it was a stark, literal truth. Harrison was deliberately poisoning his patrons, lining his pockets with their misery. And there was more, a digital Pandora's box of incriminating evidence. Robert had unearthed a trove of video files on Harrison's computer, security footage from his office, revealing a disturbing pattern of coercion and manipulation. The videos showed Lucy, her face pale and etched with terror, being subjected to Harrison's insidious threats. In one particularly chilling clip, Harrison leaned close to her, his voice dripping with menace, and said clearly, "Your brother's sick, isn't he? Needs expensive treatment. Would be a shame if you lost this job. Would be a shame if I made one phone call and got him removed from the transplant list. I have connections, Lucy. Don't test me." Daniel watched the videos, his fury building with each passing second. This wasn't simply a case of corporate corruption or financial malfeasance. This was evil, pure and unadulterated. Calculated, cold-blooded evil. Lucy hadn't been a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. She'd been a victim, a hostage trapped in a web of fear and desperation. And yet, despite the immense personal risk, she'd found the courage to fight back, to expose the truth. Robert's voice crackled through the phone, heavy with disgust and moral outrage. "What do you want to do?" Daniel gazed out at the London skyline, beginning to glow with the first faint light of dawn. "Get me the FBI," he said quietly, his voice steely and resolute. "And Robert, find out where Lucy lives. I want protection on her and her brother immediately. If Harrison even suspects she talked, she's in danger." The game was over. The time for subtle maneuvering and quiet investigation had passed. It was time for justice, swift and decisive. Sometimes in life, there are moments when everything shifts on its axis, when the tectonic plates of fate realign. Moments when the truth, long buried beneath layers of deceit, finally erupts into the light. Moments when the powerful, seemingly untouchable, are brought crashing down to earth, and the brave, the voiceless, are lifted up and given their due. This was one of those moments. At 11 o'clock the next morning, Lucy Carter walked through the doors of the Royal Crown for her shift, each step heavy with apprehension. She hadn't slept a wink, the silence of the night amplifying every creak and groan of her small apartment. Every unexpected sound had sent a jolt of fear through her, convinced that Harrison had somehow discovered her betrayal. Tommy had noticed her anxiety, his brow furrowed with concern. He had asked her why she looked so scared, but she had lied, feigning exhaustion. Now, as she walked through those gilded doors, Lucy felt like she was walking to her own execution. Maybe Harrison already knew. Maybe the mysterious man from the previous night had revealed her secret. Maybe in a few minutes, she'd be summarily fired, arrested, her life irrevocably destroyed. The restaurant was a hive of activity, a pre-launch frenzy of waiters setting tables, chefs meticulously prepping food, and the usual chaotic energy that preceded a busy lunch service. But then, Lucy heard something that made her blood run cold. A voice, amplified and commanding, cut through the noise. "Everyone, stop what you're doing." It was Harrison's voice, but it was different, strained and laced with a palpable undercurrent of panic. Lucy looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs, and her breath caught in her throat. 3 black cars, sleek and menacing, were parked directly outside the restaurant entrance. And walking through the front doors, flanked by 2 imposing men in dark suits, was someone who made the color drain from Harrison's face. Lucy didn't recognize the man at first. He was impeccably dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire car. His hair was perfectly styled, and he moved with an air of absolute confidence and unshakable authority. But then she looked at his face, really looked, and a gasp escaped her lips. It was him. The man from table 32. The man in the worn jacket and the unassuming demeanor. The man to whom she desperately entrusted the note. But he didn't look poor now. He looked like a king. "Mr. Harrison," the man said, his voice calm but carrying with effortless resonance through the entire restaurant, silencing the remaining sounds of the staff. "My name is Daniel Reed. I own Reed Pharmaceuticals. I also own this restaurant. We need to have a conversation." Harrison's face had gone from white to a sickly gray. "Mr. Reed, this is unexpected. If you'd called ahead, I would have." "I was here last night," Daniel continued, his eyes never leaving Harrison's. He began walking slowly toward the man, exuding an aura of controlled power. "I sat at table 32, right over there by the kitchen. You remember? The worst table in the restaurant? The one you give to people you think don't matter?" Harrison's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. "I had a very interesting meal," Daniel said, his voice taking on a sardonic edge. "The steak was excellent. The wine was overpriced, but good. But do you know what was truly memorable, Mr. Harrison?" He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "The service." He turned and looked directly at Lucy, his eyes radiating kindness and a profound sense of gratitude. Lucy felt tears stinging her eyes. "One person in this restaurant treated me with dignity," Daniel said, his voice ringing with conviction. "One person looked at a man in cheap clothes and saw a human being deserving of respect. One person had the courage to do what was right, even when it was dangerous." Harrison followed Daniel's gaze to Lucy, his face contorted with a mixture of understanding and incandescent rage. Harrison started to say, his voice trembling with barely suppressed fury, but Daniel held up his hand, silencing him. "Mr. Harrison, I'd like you to come to your office, please," Daniel said, his voice firm and unwavering. "There are some people who'd like to talk to you." The men in dark suits, their faces impassive and professional, were FBI agents. They followed Harrison down the hallway, Daniel and Lucy trailing behind them, a silent procession of justice. Lucy felt like she was floating, detached from reality. This couldn't be real. The shabby man from yesterday was a billionaire. He believed her. He'd actually investigated. In Harrison's office, Daniel walked straight to the bookshelf, the weight of his purpose propelling him forward. With a practiced movement, he pushed it aside, revealing the hidden safe behind it. 092019, he said calmly, reciting the code Lucy had risked everything to obtain. The safe clicked open, its secrets laid bare. Harrison collapsed into his chair, his arrogance deflating like a punctured balloon. I don't know what you think you found, but... His voice trailed off, lacking conviction. One of the FBI agents opened a tablet and turned it toward Harrison. On the screen were damning photos. The doctored ledger, the invoices from Westland Processing, the bank transfers to the crime syndicate. A meticulous record of his crimes, laid out for all to see. We know everything, Mr. Harrison, Daniel said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. The contaminated meat, the money laundering, all of it. I want a lawyer, Harrison whispered, his voice barely audible. Of course, the agent said, his tone polite but firm. You have that right. But first, we'd like to clear something up. He swiped to another image. It was a still from the video, Harrison threatening Lucy, his face a mask of malice. Mr. Harrison claims this young woman was his accomplice, the agent said, his eyes fixed on Lucy. He says she helped him cook the books willingly. Is that true, Miss Carter? Lucy found her voice, shaky at first, but growing stronger with each word. No, he threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, he'd get my brother kicked off the transplant waiting list. He said my brother would die. I see, the agent said coldly, his gaze hardening as he turned back to Harrison. We have the videos, Mr. Harrison. All of them. We know you blackmailed her. We know she was a victim, not an accomplice. They handcuffed him, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence of the room. Then Gerald Harrison, who'd been so powerful just yesterday, who'd made Lucy's life a living hell, was let out of his own office in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. When he was gone, Lucy started crying, tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears, but tears of relief. Pure, overwhelming relief that washed over her like a tidal wave, carrying away years of fear and anxiety. Daniel waited until she'd composed herself, her sobs subsiding into quiet sniffles. Then he spoke gently, his voice filled with compassion. Lucy, I need to tell you some things. He paused, choosing his words carefully. First, the debt Harrison claimed you owed, it never existed. It's erased. Gone. You owe nothing. Lucy's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you. Second, Daniel continued, I've established a medical trust fund. It will pay for all of your brother Tommy's treatments for the rest of his life, the best doctors, the best care, everything he needs. Now Lucy really did collapse. She sank heavily into Harrison's chair, her body trembling with emotion, and sobbed openly, years of fear and exhaustion and desperation pouring out of her in a torrent of tears. And third, Daniel said, his voice warm and encouraging, I'd like to offer you a job, not as a waitress. As the director of employee welfare for Reed Pharmaceuticals. He explained further, laying out his vision for a new program designed to protect workers from exploitation, to empower them to speak out against injustice, and to ensure that every employee was treated with dignity and respect. You'll oversee this program, he said. You'll have the power to investigate complaints, to fire corrupt managers, to make real change. You'll report directly to me. Lucy looked up at him, tears still streaming down her face, her eyes wide with disbelief. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this for me? Daniel knelt down so he was at her eye level, his gaze sincere and unwavering. Because last night, when everyone else in this restaurant saw a poor man unworthy of respect, you saw a human being. Because when you could have stayed silent to protect yourself, you risked everything to do what was right. Because courage like yours is rarer than any diamond. And because people like you shouldn't be serving people like me. People like you should be leading. He stood up and offered his hand, his expression hopeful. So, Lucy Carter, will you accept? Lucy took his hand, her grip firm despite her tears. Yes, she said, her voice filled with newfound resolve. Yes, I will. You know, we often think that heroes are famous people, rich people, powerful people. But that's not true, is it? Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones working double shifts with worn-out shoes, the ones fighting battles we know nothing about, the ones who choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. Lucy's story reminds us that one act of courage can change everything, that speaking truth to power matters, that seeing the humanity in others is a radical act of love. Daniel went looking for honesty and found something far more valuable, a person who reminded him why his work mattered, why building a business should never come at the cost of human dignity. And Lucy, she discovered that sometimes, when you're brave enough to ask for help, the universe sends exactly the right person at exactly the right time. Today, Lucy runs one of the most respected employee advocacy programs in the world, a beacon of hope for workers facing exploitation and injustice. Tommy received his lung transplant and is thriving, living a full and happy life. And Daniel, he still takes those undercover trips sometimes, venturing into the hidden corners of his vast empire to ensure that his values are upheld. But now he brings Lucy with him, a trusted partner and a powerful advocate for change. Two people from two different worlds working together to make sure everyone, rich or poor, is treated with the dignity they deserve. Because that's what really matters in the end. Not money, not power, but how we treat each other when nobody's watching. And that's a lesson worth remembering. The end.